Jeff Mueller is a doctor of physical therapy who covers injuries for Destination Devy. He also does work for Dynasty League Football, 4for4, and Betsperts. He's a California guy, a 49ers fan, and he went running back heavy in his fantasy drafts this year. These are his late round perspectives. This episode is sponsored by Underdog. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and they give you a ton of different games and contests to choose from each week. If you think drafting is over because the season started, you'd be wrong. You can draft teams over there each week in literal minutes. Right now, if you sign up on Underdog with promo code LATEROUND, you not only get a deposit offer of up to $1,000, but you also get access to my rest of season rankings. Those will be emailed to you once you sign up. But when you sign up, you have to use promo code LATEROUND. Head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app to do so. Again, that's promo code LATEROUND. Now back to the show. I'm excited to have someone on that is actually smart. I just have these fantasy analysts on all the time where we're saying stupid things constantly. At least with you being on, we'll drop some real knowledge for folks, just given your background and stuff. But I want to ask you to kick all this off. Like, tell everyone who you are, what you're all about, how you got into the profession that you got in. Because as I said, you're not the standard fantasy football analyst that hops on late round perspectives. And what is it that you do?
Yeah, so I'm a doctor of physical therapist. I've worked in orthopedics for 10 years now. Graduated in 2015. And yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed that. Worked through up until 2020, to where, COVID year started happening, started going through some stuff. And my wife actually encouraged me, like, hey, you should look into another hobby to pick up just with some of the extra time that I have. And I've already, played fantasy football for however many years, loved it, loved going through injuries, obviously. So I kind of cheated. She said I cheated a little bit by taking my full-time job into turning it into my hobby. And it's worked out. It's been great.
Where did you start to get yourself out there? Like, was it just you started a Twitter account? I think you and I have probably been conversing for a few years now or so, like around that. But, I definitely found you just via Twitter. Has that been the vehicle that you kind of started and and you've just done work for other sites and whatnot? Yeah,
pretty much. I started with Matt over at Dynasty Vipers. That was my first gig. He was kind enough to give me my first job there, and I worked with Calvin and Matt over there, Matt Donnelly, and then I got into Destination Devy. Ray's been awesome, has given me a platform there where I can do my thing, and he just kind of says, go for it, whatever you want to do, go for it. And then I've written for DLF and 4for4 now.
Yeah, you've been all over the place, man. Did you ever think that when you sort of started your journey on this path of doing what you're doing, that you would be doing stuff in the fantasy football space? Like, was that what I know that your wife, you had that conversation with her, but was it like something that you really thought that you were going to merge these worlds? Like, was professional sports something that you definitely wanted to focus on and get into and work with?
Yeah. So, as a PT, that was always kind of a dream, but also, working as a PT with a sports team, it's brutal. It's gruesome. So you're kind of always on call, crap hours, pays okay. But so this is kind of a best of both worlds. I get to manage and own a clinic here in town, and then I already play fantasy football. So now it actually kind of started where a bunch of friends would ask me questions like, hey, so-and-so got injured. What do you think about this player? Like, what should I expect? And a couple of my buddies also kind of encouraged me, hey, you already answer these questions for me. I bet there's people, in the universe that want these answers. You might as well do it on a platform. So it's kind of did I ever see myself doing this? Not necessarily. Has been very rewarding. Yeah. And it's been awesome building some of the relationships that I've built.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, I feel like it's similar. Not that I am sitting here being like, oh yeah, all these teams have reached out to me to work on. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. But it's similar to I like the position that I'm in with my job and my workflow and, the ownership of what I'm doing more than working for a team or even working for like a big media company or something like that, because it's just, you're just doing what you like are passionate about and want to do. And you can at least have that balance to some degree. I would imagine that there's a lot of competitiveness to working for one of those teams as well. And they can probably dictate a lot as a result of that.
Yeah. Well, and as a Niners fan, I see all these injuries occur. And part of me is like, man, get me over there so I can get these people healthy.
Yeah, fix them up. Right, exactly. One of the things I really wanted to talk to you about, and I had Edwin Porras on last year, and kind of had a conversation about this a little bit, but I think it gets brought up almost yearly, and I feel the need sometimes to like go out and defend folks like yourself on that are out on social media doing what you're doing. Because I just think that the way that people approach your work and what others are doing in the space, in the similar space as you, I just think it's a little bit inappropriate at times, the criticisms that folks throw at you. But why would you like, what would you say as to why some of those criticisms of, let's just say, like, I'll throw some out there, right? Where someone says, you can't diagnose this because you're not in the room with this guy, or, you're going to be wrong, or these Twitter docs are wrong all the time, or something like that. How would you kind of come back to that? Because I have thoughts too that I'll share afterwards, but I'm very curious as to where your head's at.
Yeah, I mean, I think a part of me thinks that some of the criticisms are warranted at times, just in some circumstances where if we decide to be a little too confident in our takes, because ultimately what we're doing is trying to diagnose not trying to diagnose, but people take it as us trying to diagnose by video, right? Which again, there's so much that can be inaccurate with that methodology. But yeah, there's a lot of, in us doing something that we already enjoy, and our, all of our attentions are typically, how can we help? How can we help get this information out? So it's a little deflating to get some of these comments, you're a fake doc, or you don't know what you're talking about, like you mentioned. And really it's just, I think ultimately it comes down to the mentality of it, psychology of fantasy football. People just don't want bad news. And oftentimes when we talk, it's bad news.
That's true.
So I think, when it comes to that drives a lot of the frustration of, you know what, I don't want to hear you say anything. Just let the team doc announce what's going on. We don't need your speculation. I get it.
The problem, though, with that, in my opinion, not to say that you're wrong with what you're saying. I mean, the problem with the way that folks act towards, and make those remarks is a lot of times teams aren't giving us that information, right? Like a lot of times teams aren't providing true timelines for when guys are going to get back. Like we're going to talk about players later where I'm asking you the timelines because the teams have not really given the timelines for these guys. So it's helpful to have that other voice out there that is independent and isn't necessarily playing with the media a little bit or playing with their opponents as to, how healthy this player actually is. And the one thing that I do want to drive home, I think, is that how is this, like what you're doing, how is it any different than what I'm doing? Like how is it any different? Like we're forecasting, we're using information and data at hand to help us make certain decisions and to help us come to certain conclusions. And for you, it's, this experience that you have in working with folks and also the literature that you've read and understand, no different than me being a fantasy football analyst who's been playing for years and years and now analyzing for, more than a decade and understanding the kinds of things that we should be looking for, and understanding what data trends are important and aren't important and all that kind of stuff. We're forecasting. I get stuff wrong daily with my job, right? Like it seems like Twitter docs are, and I say that in quotes, it seems like they're held to a higher standard that's unnecessary because no one should be, and maybe it is just some like some folks out there who are a little bit more aggressive with the takes and who are maybe a little bit more rude with their takes and the way that they approach things, right? And their conversations that they're having with people. And maybe that's just kind of like giving you guys a bad name. But in my opinion, this is no different from a forecasting perspective than anything else that we would be doing in fantasy football. Do you think that that's accurate and fair? Or, I mean, am I wrong in thinking that way?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, it comes down to projection. And I recently, I was talking to somebody maybe 2 weeks ago, and I equated it to kind of like Matthew Berry coming up with his weekly rankings. It's all projection.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at your comments, look at his comments, look at everybody else's comments in your posts. You also will get people who, I can't believe you said start this person over so-and-so.
Right.
I think there's maybe Twitter docs, we stand out a little more because there's fewer of us. And so there's more people yell at few docs. I don't know if that's the case. But yeah, it's all just projection and using the tools that we have, our knowledge, and then whatever databases that we use to try to come up with the best and closest projections possible. And we're still going to get there.
Yeah, I would imagine too that it's like a new thing that people aren't as used to, right? Like, I mean, a lot of this stuff has probably been around for 5 to 10 years for the most part, with like the injury analysis and whatnot. And it's not as, like you said, it's not as frequent as what you'll see with like a fantasy football analyst who have been around now for 30 years out there just like touting and saying things. And that's also one of the things, people are going to be more resistant to change and more resistant to like newer ideas and newer things. But I do want to just like to wrap this up, I just want to say to everybody listening to this, like, don't hate on the Twitter docs unless they're being jerks. Like, of course, you don't want that kind of behavior out there. But and that goes for literally any human being, right? It has nothing to do with being a Twitter doc or not. But it's a forecast. It's just a game of forecasting and probability and looking at information that we do as fantasy analysts that other people do at their daily jobs. I don't know. It just seems like it's an unnecessary thing to get so worked up over. One question that I asked Edwin last year that I would love to get your take on too. Do you think that players are injury prone? Like, it seems like there's some guys that just cannot stay healthy, year in and year. Like Jalen Waddle seems like he just can never, ever stay on the field. Like there's always something. And Deontay Johnson seems like he has an injury every single week, right? And then he ends up playing and then he leaves the game. Like, it's just, there are certain guys where you have that vibe. Now, I've been an analyst who generally fades injury proneness, if you will, but I would love to get as many angles at this as possible to be better at it in the future. Do you think that there is something to injury proneness? Yeah,
so I think and Edwin and I have talked a lot about this actually, but I think the answer honestly is yes and no. I think a player, when we say this is my opinion, of course it's going to differ from some other injury analysts, but when we say a player is entering this week with high or moderate injury risk, to me, that's us saying, okay, this player has that risk of they're more prone to injury. This is why I would pivot away from this player. So in a sense, in our analysis, we're actually saying that some of these players are injury prone. And just from the medical side of it, say Mike Evans is a perfect example. He strained his hamstring. He entered the game with a hamstring strain. That he's going to try to play through. Well, he's going to be prone to a re-injury in game if he's trying to play through this, especially given his skill set, his long strides. And sure enough, he suffered a hamstring re-injury, and that's going to cost him multiple weeks. So I think there's certain circumstances. Now, do I think there's certain players that are injury prone who can get out of being injury prone? Yeah, it's all how they train, it's how they recover. A good example of that would be Christian Watson, someone who specifically, high risk of hamstring strains in the past with multiple recurrence, but he spent this entire offseason, once the season ended last year, and worked on that and, retrained, set up a new regimen. I think of Deebo Samuel from a couple of years back, groin injuries, soft tissue injuries. It's all how they train and how they recover. It's a huge influence on their injury prone status. So I think yes and no is kind of my answer for that.
Are there like specific injuries that you would be looking for then that would lend themselves to injury proneness? Like if they talk about like what soft tissue type injuries and whatnot, like is that something that you would be more inclined to say, yeah, this guy is injury prone because that kind of injury has a higher likelihood of reoccurring? Like, and I guess as a layer to that, and I know that everyone is going to be specific and every timeline is going to be different and stuff like that, but like, on top of that, are there certain injuries where there's a time frame at which that injury proneness would dissipate?
Yeah, it's always hard to. I think the hard part to analyze in that is that, again, we're not assessing these players individually or face to face. So it's all kind of projection on our end. But yeah, I mean, I would say every week that a player, soft tissue injury is a perfect example of just knowing how the tissue heals, how as it's healing, scar tissue lays down, and the inflammatory response changes after multiple weeks. So as you get, if a player is playing through an injury and they're not suffering re-injuries as they're going, every week their risk is going to decrease. How much is it? Again, that kind of comes down to the projection. We're truly speculating. But yeah, I mean, every week a player gets away from their injury is good news. And that's kind of where, a lot of people, list it as risk. That's kind of where a player goes from injury prone to not being injury prone.
Are there any like context clues that you're looking for then? Like as these guys, you have like Nico Collins right now, right? So Collins on IR. What is it? Is it a hamstring that he's dealing with, or a groin hamstring? Yeah. And so he's on IR right now. And usually when these guys, this is the going back to what I was just talking about before, usually when these guys like go on IR for an extended period of time, there's like weeks and weeks where we don't hear anything about these players from the media and stuff, which is why, again, you guys can be really, really helpful. But like with Nico Collins, for instance, are there certain context clues that you might be looking for, whether through, press conferences, what coaches are saying, or practice and what you're seeing out of practices? We get full practice, limited practice, those kinds of reports, but it's very binary for the most part in terms of like how they're reporting those things. But are there any of those kind of clues that you're looking for as you sort of navigate when a guy might be able to return or how unhealthy he might be?
Yeah, that's all trying to fit multiple pieces into the one puzzle to try to figure out, okay, when's this player actually coming back? Perfect example, like you brought up Nico, I try to look at, and again, every injury analyst is going to be different, but at least my process, I try to dig into coach interviews, practice reports, specifically trying to find videos of that player, either running, sprinting, cutting, something like a high ankle sprain. If I see the player cutting off of that foot, off of that ankle, and cutting well, accelerating, decelerating, it all has to do with their movement patterns. Something like a high ankle, I don't care as much about straight line. Yeah, that's great, but how are they going to do with cutting? Because that's going to be the force that causes pain for his return, and really depends on, that's going to dictate how he's going to return and how he's going to produce once he's back. So I try to dig a lot. Sometimes there's no information, and we truly have to stick with, the practice reports and what coaches are telling us, and then trying to decipher which coach index has helped a lot. How truthful is this coach? Someone like Zach Taylor, not very truthful.
Yeah. Do you have like a database you look at or something along those lines of like, all right, Nico Collins, he has this hamstring, but he's never had a hamstring before, or he's had a lot of hamstrings before. And then if there is that previous occurrence, obviously, if it happened 8 years ago, it's probably not that big of a deal. But like if it happened 6 months ago or something like that, is that something that you're taking into consideration? I think even Edwin had talked about at one point with Nico being worried about potential re-injury moving forward because of what he's done historically. I'm not trying to pit you guys against each other here, so don't take this the wrong way. I have a lot of respect for both of you. But yeah, like just as an example, with a player like Nico and what he's going through, are you looking at what he's gone through historically and maybe his return rates with previous injuries that have been similar, and if he's had this recurring injury and what that might do to his timeline?
Yeah, so I actually spent this past off season building an entire database of just inputting all these injuries, how many games have been missed. Sometimes it's hard to find information on specific side, but as much as I can, specific side. Because that helps me more so. So like Nico, I'd have to pull up the database right now, but I know he's had some groin strains, calf strains, ankle sprains, and actually so I have a box on the side of every player profile, and as I wrote his up, I remember having some concern on soft tissue injuries, specifically lower extremity. But someone like him, we can't just. I think I've tried to tailor make my injury content looking at what other injury analysts have done in terms of, we can be concerned about an injury, but what does it specifically mean for this player? Like, what do hamstring strains or soft tissue strains lead to risk-wise, re-injury-wise, just from a percentage and production regression standpoint? But what does it mean for this specific player? So, like, Nico is a good example of, taking information like from you or like from Matt Harmon, Scott Barrett, and just seeing, yes, I have injury concerns on a player like Nico, but what does that mean? Someone like Nico who is elite per touch, yards per route run, targets per route run, all this, he's an alpha wide receiver. So even though I have him, I actually had him in the red tier in terms of re-injury risk, he was still a player I was drafting because despite the injury risk, even if he's healthy for 10 games, he's going to pay off for you. So that's very different from someone like Keenan Allen, changing teams, age, re-injury risk. We don't know what the production will be.
Yep.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's like an extra piece of the puzzle, right? It's this extra element where if it's favorable for the guy, that's great, and you don't have to worry about it. But if it's unfavorable, if the guy's good enough and has all these other things to kind of boost, to retain value, then that matters. So it makes total sense. I like that a lot because it allows us to not separate these two things so much and separate the injury side and the health side so much from the analysis side and the what we're trying to do in scoring fantasy points and stuff. I do think that it's important to do that because you're like, this whole game at the end of the day is just a probability driven game, right? We're saying, I like this, I like his price based on the pros and the cons. The pros outweigh the cons. That's why I'm going to like this guy more than where the consensus has him, right? But we live in a world where people want black and white answers all the time. And, if you say, hey, I'm fading this player, people think that you have 0% of that player, or there's no chance that you would ever draft that guy, when it's just all a probability driven thing. And I think what you're basically saying here is that that's just part of the probability equation for you, is that you're weighing that risk. And if the risk is still worth the reward, then you're still kind of approaching that player and still drafting him. And it sounds like, so was Nico a guy? I know that we're just randomly talking about Nico Collins here, but he was a guy that you flagged at the start of the year? Yeah,
I had flagged for specifically soft tissue injuries, lower extremity soft tissue injuries. And, but again, I had him in the red tier, re-injury risk in the ADP of the wide receivers, but I had specifically in bold buy. So that's how I tried to do it this offseason on all the players is, what's their injury risk? What's the tier that they're in? What's the best projection or average projection of their fantasy points per game? And would I still take that player in that range? Because that matters to me. Like some people still look at total games or total points.
Yeah.
That doesn't. A player could play 17 games and average 11 points. Like, it's not league winning,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're not taking zeros when the guy's out.
Right.
Yeah.
Just draft better in your later rounds.
Yeah, exactly. So are there any injuries that you think are overrated by the masses or underrated by the masses? What I mean by that is, a high ankle happens and the community is like, oh my God, this guy is screwed. He's done. He's never going to be the same rest of season. Or, a hamstring injury happens and people are like, oh, it's just a hamstring. It's no big deal. Are there specific injuries? Obviously, like, we all know an ACL tear is bad, right? But are there any of these like sort of more minor injuries that you think the community should pay more attention to and then maybe pay less attention to?
Yeah. Okay. So that's really funny that you brought up high ankle and hamstring because again, this is all, it has to be taken case by case, but I think high ankle sprains are often overrated, just in terms of, just because, again, just like you said, a lot of people see a high ankle and they're like, oh, they're done for the whole year, Yeah. And we've seen that with some players like Austin Eckler, I think it was last year, suffered his high ankle.
Didn't Kamara kind of have that going a couple years ago too? Like at least his production slipped a little bit, as the season went on.
Yeah. And Saquon.
Yes.
But it's like, we see some of these players where they're actually, I think it's because they return too quickly. And again, this is so team driven. It's all going to be very different. But they return too quickly. It's obviously going to impact their production. And a lot of people don't think through it's going to impact their biomechanics, how they're moving. So that could lead to compensatory injuries. That could lead to other issues, their fear for contact, whatever it might be. So I think actually high ankle sprains are kind of overrated. And we're seeing that a little bit this year with like Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor. Yep. Two teams, Houston and Indy decided to keep them out a little bit longer and make sure they're actually 100%. Sigmund Bloom, I think, recently posted about, seems like teams are starting to do a little bit better in their return from injury, so that once the player's back, they're actually producing a little bit better. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes it hard on us at times, because if they change that up, then we're like, oh, we got to be cautious about playing this guy, and then little do you know, he's actually completely ready to go on and play. Are there any injuries then that are way worse than what the masses generally think?
Yeah, I don't know about necessarily way worse, but at least the ones that I flag are usually groin or hamstring injuries, just because they impact so much of how a player moves, specifically in terms of deceleration, acceleration, cutting, especially groin injuries, cutting. So like looking at, guys all have flagged, or like Jawan Jennings. Trying to think of someone else suffered a groin injury recently. But it's just, it impacts, it puts them at risk for other injuries, especially hamstring, like we saw with Kyler Murray. He had a hamstring strain. He's a quarterback who's a little bit more mobile. A couple years back, he tried to return, play through it, led to an ACL tear, because the hamstrings are key in dynamic stabilization of the knee. So there's so many other things that it impacts, where I don't think we should view it just as, it's a hamstring strain, it's no big deal. There are some cases where, the ones that are hard to tell, and this is why I try to dig a lot on the information, and really we just have to rely on information from interviews, is if it's a player who just, they had a little tightness. Like, it's not a true strain, but something's going on, where it doesn't actually impact their production much, and then it goes away within a week. Yeah. But especially the ones that, they've gone on for a couple weeks, the player tries to return too quickly, like Mike Evans, that's concerning.
Yeah. And it sounds like what you're saying is that it's like the overcompensation of returning too quickly and what that can do to other parts of your body. I think anyone who exercises have experienced this to some degree, right? I've screwed up my butt muscles before running, right? And then all of a sudden I have IT band issues and stuff, or it's just it's just very easy to see how it all works together in that way. I don't think the average, I don't even think this way, and I'm a degenerate with this stuff, but the average fantasy manager is not thinking about that aspect of things. The Kyler Murray is a great example where, it turns into that ACL, but we're not thinking about that at all. And I'm assuming that's all part of the re-injury risk that you're referring to here.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's, no one, so I say no one. I just thought of one example, like Saquon Barkley, where an injury analyst posted we saw this coming. It's you don't actually see it coming. It's just we know there's risk. It's not like we're projecting Kyler to tear his ACL because he came back from a hamstring strain. Right. It's one of those where it's just, just know there's risk involved here, and we just have to hope that the player doesn't suffer a re-injury.
Yeah, it's similar whenever fantasy analysts tout regression, and then one guy just goes so far in the other direction. It's no, you didn't. It's last week I talked about how the Rams were running for so many of their touchdowns, and regression was going to come, and then all of a sudden they throw for 4 touchdowns, and I didn't predict that. I just projected it to be a little bit more normal moving forward. It's not an overcorrection. It's not like you're out there saying, and to your point, it's like you're out there saying this guy hurt his hamstring, he's going to tear his ACL today. It's just, it'd be absurd. All right, so I want to walk through kind of what your typical process kind of looks like when someone goes down with an injury. What are the things that you're looking for when you're coming up with the timetable to return? Are you looking at historical precedents, the age of the player? That's something that I feel like people have talked about a little bit more and more. I know Edwin's very, very big on younger guys coming back from ACL versus older guys coming back from ACL, stuff like that. The team he's on, you've been mentioning teams a lot. I'm very curious about that too. Are there teams that you trust more than others, not just in terms of what they're saying to the media, but how they're training these guys and how they're bringing them back? What are some of the biggest factors that you're looking at to kind of get that timetable for return to play?
Yeah, that makes me think of a couple other things, but I would say the first, I'll start on every player is different. when a player suffers an injury, first thing I'm looking at is, and again, we're just projecting based off video, so there's going to be some things that are wrong, but as close as possible as I can get is what exactly happened. What are the risks here?
Yeah.
And I try to, over the years, I've tried to be more specific in terms of, like, I don't want to throw everything at the wall, right? If I say a player suffers a knee injury, I could throw bone bruise, MCL, LCL, ACL, capsule, everything.
Sure.
And then I would be right. You can't mark that as a hit, right? From an accuracy standpoint. It's like, yeah, you got 1 out of your 29 guesses right.
Yeah, it's like here's my sleeper show of 20 guys, and one of them was right, so therefore it was a great sleeper show. Yeah,
yeah. Perfect example. So yeah, I've tried to be as specific as possible, and then from there I look at, okay, does this specific player have a past injury of that or something related? Say it's a knee. Do they have any past calf or hamstring or ankle injuries, whatever it might be? And then I look at percentage in general, on average, of that injury. What are the typical timelines? And then I also add in, it's just kind of a list that you go through.
Yeah.
And then I try to add in, it's going to be imperfect on this one, but like you brought up, the team aspect. Someone like Green Bay. Green Bay is a perfect example. They tend to be a little more conservative in their returns to play, especially because, think of their wide receivers. They have such a big rotation of receivers. They can kind of afford to have one out, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
And then the staff in general, or like the Rams, this I wish bringing up Puka, I wish I had thought of a little bit more. I think I highlighted it in one comment, and then I just kind of didn't even think about it. The Rams use data points and player movement just to determine, okay, how are they moving biomechanics wise? Are there any re-injury risks if they play? And I totally overthought that with Puka. So like a team like the Rams, if the player is playing, that to me tells me, okay, they are going to be good to go.
The team stuff is really interesting to me. Like, are there teams that pop into your head that you're like, they rush guys back too fast, there's higher injury risk, and we should be wary about that? And then on the flip side, you mentioned the Rams is like, don't be as afraid if these guys are coming back for LA because they have all of these mechanisms in place.
Yeah, and again, thinking of Puka, I wish I had honed in on that a little bit more, and everyone really should have, because one, they're tied in with Cedars-Sinai, one of the best medical facilities around. And then two, they have extra data points that tell them, okay, this player is good to go. Whereas, some information that we have, and it really changes. It's actually really hard to track because you have to go through and see, have the medical staff changed, their strength and conditioning team, the regimen. So like the Niners, I think I was cued in a little bit more on them because I'm a Niners fan. But back in June, their VP of player and health performance left to work for Atlanta, and in June, a ton of their injuries started spiking up.
Interesting.
So it just kind of makes you wonder. It's information that we would never really have, but it kind of makes you speculate or wonder what changed there. Did someone new come in and completely change the strength and conditioning program, their recovery program? Recovery is key, and not a lot of teams do that. Plus, some of us have a little bit more information, boots on the ground with, like we know the Bengals med staff is not, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. But
sure. No. Yeah.
They're not
Look, I mean,
best.
we trash teams all the time as fantasy analysts. So,
true.
I feel you.
I'll just say we know some teams are just not as good from a recovery standpoint. So there's some teams that we just know, like Baltimore a couple years back. We just kind of knew, okay, if they suffer, they're going down with a bunch of injuries. I think we need to be a little more cautious with this team.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I also wonder, like, I mean, there's probably like so much noise in that kind of data, even more noise than what you're going to find in like coordinator data and stuff when you're analyzing like how guys want to, do their, at least you can like visually see how coordinators are working their offense. And it's not just all driven by like, personnel and stuff like that. But I do wonder, what I'm getting at is I do wonder if like the example of the 49ers, if, him or her, whoever it was leaving to go to Atlanta, and then you seeing a change in their injuries if it was just merely a reporting thing too, right? Like, could it like just be a difference in like the way that they were discussing the injuries versus, you know, how they actually were working with the team and training with the team? I have no idea. I'm just playing into the idea that there's probably a lot of like, it's just probably really, really difficult to really nail that down. But like a lot of things in fantasy football, it's probably pretty helpful at the extremes. Like it's probably relatively helpful to know that Cincinnati is, hey, like watch out a little bit here. And I love that you throw out Cincinnati too, because T. Higgins has just been a nightmare the last like 2 or 3 years of his career with the injury stuff. But it's funny. All right, so I want to get into some player takes now because, not any of like the detailed stuff of like the weekly guys who are they going to play, are they not going to play. This is more so, the longer term injuries where, you know, we've tried to place some bets or not, on these guys based on when they might return. And I want to start off with Jonathan Brooks because I feel like I just want to know from your perspective if you think the fantasy community with, you know, of course we have the advantage of hindsight right now where, you know, it's week 9. He hasn't played a single snap yet. We don't know if he's going to play this week. It sounds like, you know, we're recording this on a Wednesday this week. And it sounds like he did practice in full today, which was a nice little change. And maybe things are trending in the right direction. But regardless of all of that, you know, the fantasy community, myself included, because I really liked him as a player, going back to what you were talking about before of like weighing the risk and reward and all of that. But a lot of us were high on Jonathan Brooks. And obviously, I thought that he was going to play a lot sooner than right now. I think others thought he was going to play sooner than right now. But do you think that we approach things incorrectly with him, given the timetable of the ACL? You know, he tore it in November of last year. We don't have any real data on him for the most part because he hasn't played in the NFL yet. Do you think that we approach this too aggressively with Jonathan Brooks, or do you think it was still okay, even with hindsight in mind?
I mean, ultimately, it'll depend on how he produces once he does play. And like you said, that full practice today was great because, you know, looking at last week, the week before he went from questionable to last week being doubtful. So I started wondering, did he have some kind of setback? Yeah. And then Canales was talking about, you know, well, we don't fully know. You know, it's still a possibility that he doesn't play at all this year. Like, whoa, what? You know, where does that come from?
Yes.
And I don't have his. I meant to write down his surgery date here. I think it was the injury happened in November. The surgery date I want to say was 12/15 or 12/11. I have a bunch of numbers jumbled in my head. But so looking at projection wise, you know, I thought for sure he would be active by now. I mean, today he's now 10 months, 19 days out from surgery. So in theory, you know, it's so hard to determine. I guess we should have looked at, okay, he's a rookie, he's coming off ACL. We don't fully know, the one thing from the coaching aspect, we don't fully know how conservative or aggressive Canales or Carolina's staff is going to be, you know, from an injury standpoint. He's new staff here. And then also I think a lot of people underprojected how well Chuba Hubbard would be playing. Yeah. So I think that plays a role. And then also, you know, you never know, would he have been playing sooner if Carolina was playing better? You know, have they kind of slow played him because they've been so bad they're not winning? So why, you know, kind of give him what am I? Like a red shirt, yeah. So you know, when I looked back at the ADP and it's like the running backs, I think it was from May or June the ADP of the running backs, and the running backs taken around him. It's just kind of like, you know, you probably could have taken wide receivers there instead. But the bets weren't even that much better in his range anyways. So I think majority of people drafting where he was, I want to say he was between running back. He got up to running back 22 at one point, which was too high in my opinion. But, you know, range from there to running back 28 to 30. And really, if you were drafting him there, you're kind of drafting him for mid to late production anyways. Right. So it's just kind of a bummer that he's not active yet.
Do you think it was like one of the comps that I went to, and look, I understand sample size matters. Of course I do. This is this is what I talk about literally like every podcast basically. But there's not always going to be a sample size or like an easy comparison of a really good, like he's young too, right? A young, really athletic, great producer, great running back, tearing his ACL in that time frame, getting drafted high, like having good draft capital, and then, what is he going to do the next year? The closest comp that I could find was like Todd Gurley, right? Where Gurley tore his ACL in the exact same time frame, and they slow played it a little bit with Gurley, but he was back in like week 3, 4, and then he basically just dominated through, and that was on in a bad offense, like really similar situation as what we have with Brooks. The difference, maybe to your point, is the Chuba Hubbard effect here. But do you think that was a mistake to like look back at that single instance and say like, well, Gurley did it, maybe Jonathan Brooks can do it? Or like, I don't know. I've had this discussion a lot with folks on my Discord because I think it's just a really kind of fun game theory related question, and also just like us trying to figure out what we should do in the future with this kind of situation. I almost am sitting here thinking like, I know we have hindsight to our advantage, but I think I'd make the same decision again when he's he was in the RB 30 range, RB 30, RB 35 range. And it's like, if he's as good as like my prospect model's saying, and as good as what his talent profile looks like, I don't know. We saw Gurley literally, give us that top 10 running back performance, which would be massive if Brooks could give us that. Even from now through the end of the year, that would be massive. But, is looking at that single data point a bad idea, or did that just kind of play into like, well, that's kind of the recovery for these ACLs to begin with?
Yeah. It makes me think of, everyone throws out like trust the process, statement. Yeah. And it either ticks people off, or everyone's like, yeah, trust the process.
That's fine. People listening to this show love the trust the process. So you're all good here. Yeah, you're all good here.
It makes me think of okay, Christian McCaffrey, if he comes back and scores, 80 to 90% of his typical production, because he's scoring touchdowns, he's getting a couple catches, I think you still look at it and say, yeah, that hurt a lot for 10 weeks, but now he's scoring what I needed him to score, right? So it makes it worth it, even though it's late season production and it's winning you weeks. Brooks, I think it truly depends on the type of manager, type of player that you are. If we're talking best ball, that's different. Like Dynasty, if you're fine slow playing it, people are taking them at like 105, 104, 105, 106. You're either fine with that and you're comfortable with basically a redshirt year, or you look back and say, man, next time, why would I take the running back coming off an ACL? And I do think running backs coming off ACL underproduce compared to wide receivers. But I'd have to dig into that more, because obviously we have like Jameson Williams. He was a very late season injury though. He tore his in January.
Like January. Yeah.
And didn't. I think he played in like 2 games or had 1 or 2 catches. But looking back at it, it's like, well, okay, I would rather. I wish I would have taken Brian Thomas. Someone who's healthy in a high projection standpoint or perspective there, over Brooks, instead of just hoping Brooks produces by week 8.
Yeah. So can I just ask you straight up, like, is Jonathan Brooks' recovery from this ACL, the time that he has been out now since surgery, is it an atypical recovery versus what we typically see? Because like, I'm looking at like TJ Hawkinson. Has this been different than TJ Hawkinson and what he's been going through right now? Or is the timetable similar? Like, is this basically what I'm saying is this any sort of outlier, or maybe even like a 25th percentile outcome or something like that for Jonathan Brooks that we've seen so far?
Yeah, I would say, honestly, thinking of my database and all the running backs who have suffered ACL injuries, return has been between 9 months and a week to 11 months, 2 weeks. So, and again, he's active this week, or even, we don't know if he's going to be active this week, but it sounds like he's going to be at least activated, so he will play at some point this season.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he's going to play at least by 11 months. So technically within that range, I guess, again, if I were to look back at it, it makes sense given he's a rookie compared to someone like TJ Hawkinson. Hawkinson already has NFL reps. He knows the playbook. He doesn't have to get accustomed to, tight end's different than running back, obviously, because you're following your blocks, you're getting used to all that. TJ Hawkinson has had a pretty quick recovery though, because from surgery, he's going to be off ACL and MCL. He's going to be right at like 8 months, 29 days.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. My memory's off. That's week 7. So he's going to be 9 months, 13, 14 days.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of, the individual, but they're still within the range that we typically see for these injuries.
Yeah. If Brooks was returning and it was like 13 months, 14 months out, I'd be pretty concerned. Like something happened, something went wrong here on this one.
Yeah.
Maybe he's dealing with some cartilage damage, persistent swelling that they're trying to get a handle on. But I haven't heard anything like that. I don't know if that happened. I don't know if we'll hear about it. That's the downside. Yeah. Sometimes, think of J.K. Dobbins in the past where, again, Harbaugh, he reported it as a clean ACL, and then J.K. Dobbins, a year and a half later, went on an interview and said, "Oh no, it wasn't just ACL. I actually tore my hamstring, my PLC, my LCL, It's like, oh, okay. So that would have changed my projection a little bit.
Yeah, right. Exactly. All right. So we talked a little bit about Christian McCaffrey very, very briefly, but let's just get to it. Is he going to be ready at the bye? Have you been surprised by, like, as shocked as the layman has with how things have developed with CMC, going from, us being pretty optimistic in August that he was just going to be fine in week 1 to, he's not going to play week 1, but he'll be ready in week 2, to all of a sudden he's hanging out in Germany and no one knows why he's in Germany. All these things are like, it's just been a crazy saga. So I guess this is a 2-parter. Number 1, is he going to come back after the bye? And then number 2, have you been as surprised as a lot of us with this injury and the progression of it?
Yeah, I think surprised is a good word, considering how it was reported or not reported, really. Because it really initially was reported just as a calf strain. And, looking, again, like you said earlier, hindsight, thinking back to his calf strain back in, I think it was week 17 of last year. I kind of wish I had thought about that a little bit more and process that or put that into the projection, considering it's like, okay, well, that's been 10 months since that happened. He's now dealing with another calf injury or new calf injury or re-injury. And it led to, obviously now hindsight, like looking back to the reports, led to musculotennis junction issues, Achilles tendonitis issues, and on both sides. So the good news on this is that, again, probably perk of me being a Niners fan, I've dug into it probably every day because I look forward to when he returns. He's now been about 3 weeks, 3.5, 4 weeks, where he's been pushing it pretty hard and no setbacks. So it sounds like they're going to really push him in an actual practice situation, which is key. You can't, I know people talk about simulated practice and all that. You can't simulate how the reactionary movements. When a defender's actually getting in your space, how are you moving? How are you changing your direction of movement? How are you pushing off? A lot of the ground reaction forces that are going to go right through his Achilles basically put him at risk of what they need to look at is does his Achilles act up or get inflamed again with those specific movements. So as of right now, it sounds like he's on track, and they're going to put him basically through his final test. And then as long as that goes well, it's hard for me to project because, again, it really just depends on how that practice goes. But it seems like he's going to be active week 10.
Yeah. Would you anticipate if he's active, if we don't hear let's just pretend we don't hear anything negative through the media that there was a setback or something like that. He's active. He's ready to go. Are you anticipating the normal Christian McCaffrey workload, or do you think there's a little bit of a ramp up there?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a ramp up. I don't think we'll see. So I guess I have to take back my comment that I said earlier about 101, drafting him at 101.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Just from a utilization standpoint, I could definitely see, especially thinking through how well Jordan Mason has run, not necessarily in the goal line, but between the 20s, and then Garendo. I think what we'll see is probably a 40-50% utilization compared to what we're used to seeing. But I do think he's going to get his goal line work back right away. And then probably the receiving work.
And then this is a projection of short term, but then eventually, if things go well, you would anticipate, like, how long do you think that would be? Like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or would it be the regular season until they get to the play? And I know that this is a not easy, thing to answer, because this has been a situation that no one has been able to predict. But would that be something, though, that you think would be just a couple week thing, and then we will see the CMC, or do you think that there's a chance that they just wait until the playoffs?
Yeah,
if they're there, of course.
What? They have to be there. Yeah, hopefully they're there. Honestly, I think it comes down to some of the team dynamics, because I honestly think Kyle Shanahan will go into each game with a game plan, with a desired goal to hit for CMC touch-wise and snap-wise. Yeah. But some of it will probably come down to how's that game specifically going. Because we've seen that with some of these injury returns, like Debo last week. I don't think he was set to play as many snaps or get as many touches as he actually did. I don't think that was the original game plan. But the game was close for a while, where they were kind of forcing him the ball in situations where I would be willing to bet they wished they didn't have to do that.
Right. Right.
So if they get in some of these situations where they don't fully trust Garendo yet, they don't fully trust Mason, especially, again, goal line situations, short yardage, where Mason's kind of struggled a little bit. I could see CMC going a little bit over his touch projections, his snap projections that the Niners want to hit, ideally, with the long-term goal of really preserving him for the playoffs.
Yeah, makes sense. Another running back who suffered an injury early this season was Isaiah Pacheco. And to me, this is another one. I mean, this is probably number one on my list of haven't heard much about what's going on with him. And so just based on the injury and based on what you've seen, I know that there were reports that he's been like running and stuff like that. And like, I have no idea what that really means to his return and his injury and stuff. But what does that tell you about, is he going to be back this season? When is he going to be back this season? And when he is back, do you anticipate a ramp up with him, or do you think that he can just come back and play?
Yeah, I think so. Kind of a similar situation to where I mentioned before. Of like, I wish I could see some video of how he's performing and how he's running, because for him, more so, the lateral movement's going to be key. And I've heard, I've seen some reports that he's running on a treadmill. That's great, but again, straight line. He should be doing that at this point. But the key with those, with his surgery, he's non-weight bearing for a period of time. There's going to be atrophy that occurs. And then they have to make sure there's no biomechanical issues. So I view it as he's going to come in with some conditioning issues. He's going to come in, he's lost some strength over the time period of his recovery that he won't necessarily have regained by now. Like, say he's active this week or next week. He won't be, but say he is. He's not going to be as strong as he should be. So I could honestly see this being a situation where they ease him in, and especially with how Kareem Hunt has played, I think it'll honestly help the both of them to keep both of them fresh. Because Andy Reid actually talked about Hunt recently Hunt's been kind of wearing down because he entered, he signed, I don't even remember what week it was, but he kind of signed
he definitely was not prepared for this. Yeah. Right.
So he's getting a little rundown. And Reid was talking about that. I was like, man, I want to find ways to decrease his load, but we trust him.
Yeah, but we have a fullback as our RB2 right now, right? So we have no choice. Yeah.
So I do think that's kind of where I see. I'm projecting a little bit of when Pacheco returns. I do see it more of a 1A, 1B situation where Pacheco and Hunt probably help each other just from a volume standpoint, where their touches will probably be more efficient. But I'm not projecting Pacheco to go back to his week 1, week 2 utilization, which was like mid to high range running back 1 utilization.
Oh yeah. He was getting awesome usage. Is that something that you're then projecting like this season, just because it's that kind of injury, and then maybe next year he'd be back to that kind of usage, or is it maybe just like a 3-4 week thing?
So the challenge with that is, again, we don't fully know when he's going to be active, but some of that projection leads right into fantasy playoffs. So he's going to be a guy that, you kind of hope once he's active that he regains his at least goal line situation, because if he's scoring touchdowns, that makes up for some of the volume that he's lost. But we won't know if it's going to be him or Hunt. So that's kind of where I view Pacheco. So the other challenge with Pacheco, I guess, is, I would view that as next year, efficiency per touch, I would expect to be better than when he returns this year. But we already knew that the Chiefs were trying to replace Pacheco. They looked into signing Josh Jacobs. They looked into signing a couple others and drafting a running back. So do they do that again? So that's more of a dynasty conversation. Personally, I would rather avoid Pacheco given his re-injury risk and overall injury risk, and then just the fact that Kansas City probably replaces him.
So I got one more question I want to ask you. It's been, in my opinion, this is totally anecdotal. Like, I haven't dug into looking at ADP versus games missed at different positions and stuff like that for this year. But it definitely feels like higher end wide receivers in particular are going down at just an absurd rate compared to what we typically see. And then I'm putting together rankings today, man, and I'm going through my the running backs, and I'm like, how is running back this deep right now? It's crazy. You get to RB30 and you're like, I'm still feeling okay about this guy potentially putting up a top 10, top 15 performance. It's just wild how we sort of seen wide receivers go down at a really, really high rate, running backs go down at a really low rate. Now, I've done really surface level analysis of this. I did this for last year's guide a little bit, and I found that actually there wasn't a massive difference between running back injury, wide receiver injury with early round guys. I think that, people kind of seem to misinterpret zero RB a little bit to think that it's only because running backs get hurt more that zero RB works, when it's in reality, it's about, fragility and the fact that when a running back gets hurt, the backup running back is more predictable and projectable and all that kind of stuff. But my real question though with all of this is, has this season been different in your eyes with these wide receivers? And is there any reason that you think or is there anything that could be the reason as to why these wide receivers seem to be going down at a much higher rate than the running backs?
Yeah, I think this year is kind of a fluke year. I would not be surprised if next year is different, where wide receivers are staying a little healthier. Looking at the wide receivers who have gotten injured, I mean, some of them, actually a lot of them entered, looking at my database, a lot of them entered the season already in the red tier anyways. Like Puka, just given his play style, Mike Evans, age, past soft tissue injuries, Nico, past soft tissue injuries. But even looking at running backs, I mean, a lot of the running backs right now are healthy, but a lot have still been getting injured. They're just playing through these injuries compared to the wide receivers. So I honestly, I'm kind of viewing it as a fluke year. And a lot of the injuries, I mean, concussions, they're hard to predict. They're kind of individual, situations. Ankle sprains, there's been a lot of hip tackle injuries, even though they're not getting called. Hamstring strains, again, some of that comes down to just looking at past injury history with some of these wide receivers. I haven't specifically seen a pattern there, and I'm kind of viewing it as a fluke year, where next year I bet it course corrects. But it'll be interesting to track.
Yeah, and I've been saying this too, is I would not be shocked at all if the market from an ADP standpoint and stuff, they're boosting up these running backs, and then all of a sudden, then something like zero RB or at least a hero RB approach. This is why I generally just go hero RB every year, because it's just kind of playing the middle in a way where when these crazy things do happen, you're not completely toast. But yeah, I would. What I've basically been thinking is that the market's going to overcorrect and overreact to what's going on with these injuries, and assume that running backs can stay healthy and will stay healthier than the wide receivers will, when we know that that's not necessarily the case. I mean, am I wrong with that analysis about running back and wide receiver injuries and the occurrence of them, that it's not dramatically different between the two positions?
Yeah, I would say not necessarily dramatically different. I think a small percentage lean toward more running backs. But again, the game theory behind it is, say a top wide receiver gets injured compared to a top running back getting injured, you're going to be able to find a replaceable value at running back much easier than wide receiver.
Right.
Off waivers, in a trade, whatever it might be. But yeah, so I would say small difference between the two. I drafted running back heavy this year.
Nice. You're feeling good right now. Yeah, you're feeling real good. I mixed it up. I played it very, very middle of the road. So I'm fine. Yeah. It's not been like a special year, but it hasn't been a horrible year. But we'll see. It does seem like there has been fewer long-term running back injuries. And then unfortunately, just from like a regression standpoint, it feels like it's inevitable that one of these guys is going to like tear their ACL. Knock on wood. Everyone knock on wood right now. But it just feels like it's a violent game, right? Like it's crazy that we really haven't. Now we had Christian McCaffrey, to be fair, but we just really haven't had many long-term injuries going down with the backs. And I'm not hating on it. I like it for, a lot of my teams and whatnot, but hopefully that does not go down for us and we can continue to ride the running backs that we have. But Jeff, man, this was a pleasure to finally hop on and chat with you and pick your brain a little bit about this stuff. It's nice to kind of be on this side of the discussion instead of like having to be the expert with another expert and kind of go back and forth about fantasy analysis. I can be a completely dumb human being asking you very stupid questions about all the awesome stuff that you're doing. But let everyone know where they can find you, what you're up to, all that good stuff. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks for reaching out about that. It's been awesome. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or X at JMThrivePT, and then injury analysis and conversations in the Discord at Destination Devy or DD. And then injury articles on 444. Awesome. And as usual, you guys can find my stuff over on lateround.com. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the newsletter. Take advantage of the Underdog promo. But as always, everyone, most importantly, thanks for tuning in.